warm welcome all of you on behalf of IPMA and FICCI. On behalf of IPMA, I am honored to have this opportunity to share this platform amidst some great eminent speakers of the industry and sharing insights. IPMA is one of its kind association which encompasses all pharma and packaging machine manufacturers across India. In these difficult times of global pandemic, where on-ground gatherings for knowledge sharing haven't been possible, we have been doing various knowledge sharing webinars and relative activities on virtual platform. We invite you all to participate in our virtual exhibition, which we are hosting along with today's webinar and further collaborate with our exhibitors. We thank FICCI for this association and their support to our industry as a part of Vision Make in India put forth by our Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi. Today, we have with us Shri Kaushik Bhai, who holds an immense experience in the pharma industry. So, without taking up further time, over to you, Kaushik Bhai.
Okay, thank you, Harshit Bhai, who is our Secretary for Indian Pharma Machine Manufacturers Association. Once again, very good morning, my fellow pharma professionals. I am Kaushik Desai, an advisor to IPMMA. I am going to conduct today's webinar. Once again, I welcome and thank our guest speakers, Anuvrat Singhal and Dr. Mahesh Balgat, who have joined us today to share their experience on the theme of the webinar, Pharmaceutical Technology, the Way Forward. Friends, whenever we think of technology of future, the first thing that comes to our mind is automation, digitization, high-speed lines, and now new buzzword, Pharma 4.0. New technology also deals with new dosage forms and new delivery systems. The market drivers of technology are intense global competition, uncertainties in energy and supply cost, ever-rising input cost, and decreasing product life cycle, and finally, exponential growth in IT sector. The adoption of new technology requires an open mind and willingness to embrace the changing era. There is a major trend underway to develop flexible plants capable of producing multiple products. Today, we have an expert on projects, Mr. Anuvrat Singhal, who is Managing Director of GLAD India, GLAD Engineering Private Limited, and Dr. Mahesh Balgat, Chief Operating Officer of Syngene International Limited, to share his experience on today's most debated subject, vaccines. Before I introduce our first speaker, Anuvrat, I would like all of you to follow some housekeeping rules. We will have question and answer session towards end of both the presentations. You can start posing your questions through your chat box icon. All of you are requested to remain in mute mode so as to have a smooth flow of the webinar. Now, let me introduce Anuvrat Singhal, who is our guest speaker for today's webinar. Anuvrat is an electronics and communication engineer with master's degree in management from United Kingdom. He has 18 plus years of experience both in India and UK and is with GLAD India since its inception in the year 2008. GLAD India, under his leadership, has handled pharma, biotech, food, and chemical projects across the globe. The countries like USA, EU, Middle East, CIS countries, Africa, Southeast Asia, and India. He is an avid reader and enjoys cooking, which he does many times during this pandemic. I have now great pleasure in welcoming Anuvrat and request him to make his presentation on way of the future, pharma engineering and design. Mr. Anuvrat, please.
Good morning, sir. Thank you so much for introducing me in such a wonderful way. I wouldn't have done justice to myself had you allowed me to introduce myself. Good morning, everybody. Is my screen visible?
No, sir.
Now, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, good morning. Namaskar to everybody. I hope I find you all in good spirits and safe wherever you are. I would like to take this opportunity and thank Kaushik Desai sir for giving me this platform, and of course IPMA and FICCI for enabling us to share with you our ways, our methods on Pharma Future. I am Anurag Sindhal, as already shared by Kaushik Bhai. I am the Managing Director of GLAT Engineering Services based out of New Delhi. And I do believe that we can share with you certain limelights in the pharma industry which will help shape the future in the many years to come in the future. The agenda of my presentation will be to give you an introduction about GLAT Engineering, who we are, what we've done, and how we are handling projects in the country. I will share with you 2 case studies of mega facilities which we believe could be the future of pharma industry, where we have to think billions and, let's say, provide medication not only to entire segments or states, but the entire countries worldwide. One of them would be based on a vertical concept and the other on a horizontal concept, which we would dive into in the slides coming forward. I would touch upon certain trends in pharma industry, what we believe are the future. We could be completely wrong, but this is something that we have been seeing since the past few years. And we believe in the next decade or so, these would be the buzzwords for our industry. A little bit about GLAT. GLAT is a family-owned company started back in 1954 by a gentleman, Mr. Werner GLAT. The primary aim back then was to make fluid bed processes, tablet coaters for the powder processing industry, which is also true today. But fast forward now to 2020, and through continuous innovation, we are able to diversify into multiple segments. And all in all, we have around 3,000 plus team members spread across 14 countries worldwide. Like most organizations, GLAT is also divided into business units, or let's say business verticals. One of them is Pharmaceuticals, which deals with contract manufacturing and drug delivery solutions for the powder processing industry. Process Technology Pharma, which most of us know already, makes equipment for oral solid dosage forms, whether it's fluid beds, coaters, IBCs, so on and so forth. We have another division that takes care of non-pharma equipment. And the primary difference between the pharma and non-pharma is, in pharma, we are dealing with batch sizes of few hundred kgs, where in non-pharma, we deal with continuous manufacturing and tons per hour. Last but not the least is the division where I come from, the Process and Plant Engineering, which deals with engineering projects worldwide, not only in the pharma segment, but also in biotech, food, feed, medical devices. We have our headquarters in Weimar and further 2 offices in Germany. We have the Southeast Asian head office here in New Delhi. We have an office in Moscow to take care of the CIS and the neighboring countries, and a design unit in the United States to cater to that segment of the globe. All in all, we are 300 plus engineers focused primarily on pharmaceutical, healthcare, and chemical industries. How we do projects is must be known to most of us. We start with consulting, where we do concept studies, where we dive into what a project entails and how a project or facility could look like in the coming future. The most important thing we discuss here is the layout philosophy, how a plant would look like as we move forward in a project. What would be the technology deployed? What would be the level of automation? What would be the GMP aspects, the man, material, and other flows are all captured in this critical stage of the project. Of late, we have been seeing certain partners worldwide where projects have not gone the way it was envisaged by the owner, just because we didn't have a good concept. After concept, we of course move to the engineering phases before we do the validation qualification activities. And just to share that in certain countries, we also do turnkey projects. So what do we mean by a project, and how do we start what is the most important question that all of us need to answer when we dive into projects today, tomorrow, and day after? We should know what kind of therapeutic product categories do we want to manufacture today and in the next 5 to 10 years. We should know whether we are building a mono or a multi-product, whether there are cross-contamination issues we have to cater to early on. Of course, everybody wants maximum productivity. And in today's pandemic situation, automation or 4.0 is a new buzzword. So all that has to be factored in early on into our projects so that there is not only ease of operation for the engineer deployed outside, but also there is possibility to expand in a logical manner. I'll start with the first case study, which comes from a project we did in Europe. Due to confidentiality, I will not be sharing any company names. However, I will touch upon the major aspects of or the key design features. This was a highly productive facility, and the mandate was to produce 2 or 4 blockbuster products in large volumes, or let's say mega volumes. For us, mega means more than 10 billion tablets or capsules churning out of a facility. Of course, this facility had to be pharma future ready, deploying automation aspects and other key Internet of Things aspects. The major challenge that we faced was handling nearly 10 to 12 tons of product every day, and the equipment technology was also quite critical to the design of this mega facility. In this project, we looked at the main equipment, which was the fluid bed, which went nearly 25 meters high. So this was the heart of that project. And the entire plant or the other process units were built around it. Of course, we went vertical, where we started at one level and went down the levels in order to utilize gravity to our advantage. As you could see, we deployed the ASRS solution, which is an automatic storage and retrieval solution here, because the volumes were such that the conventional warehouse technology would not have worked. And of late, we are seeing ASRS penetrate the pharma industry directly from the e-commerce or let's say the auto manufacturing industry, where we move the product or let's say the raw material at one level and then use gravity to take the product below in through the wall or through the ceiling concept directly into the process steps before it is tableted and then coated and then final packaging and out. All in all, having a linear unidirectional flow of the product. The unique thing that we deployed here was the use of automated guided vehicles. As since the project had limited products, we were able to deploy silos on one level and then use AGVs to go from one level, from one, let's say, bay to the other to collect the right recipe for that day. And then transfer the product to the floor below, where it is finally fluidized in a bed and then transferred to tablet presses or coaters or other process areas as required. Just to give you an overview how it looked, the end finished product, the AGVs, which are on weighing cells and move on guided rails for the recipes. The second case study which I will share with you is quite similar in terms of volume. However, the number of products is completely different. In the earlier one, we had only 3 or 4 SKUs. Here we had more than 250 different product types to be manufactured per annum. Of course, a 3-shift model where the client was looking at 14+ billion tablets capsules. This is a project we did in India for one of the top pharmaceutical companies who wanted to export these products to the highly regulated market. Of course, the mandate was also for us to have an expandable facility, a modular facility, where the owner wanted to start manufacturing early on and not wait till the entire plant is built, commissioned, and validated, which took a few years. So what we did was we thought out of the box. Generally, in a pharmaceutical facility, we would look at clusters, whether clusters of granulation, cluster of tablet presses, clusters of coaters, cluster of packaging units. We thought that idea will not work here because we wanted to start production ASAP. So we divided the facility into various smaller facilities, or what we call trains, in order to look at them at an individual level. Of course, we had a central supply corridor and what we called a backbone or spine, where major movement of product, major movement of utilities happen. And then here too, we had, as per GMP, a unidirectional product flow, which entered the trains and out and then straight to the ASRS for storage and further distribution. In the previous case study, we looked at Mother Nature for a solution for gravity, and here we could not do that as the number of products was so large that going vertical would not have been the best utilization of resources. So we went horizontally, where we moved the product in a very linear manner within this facility. The other major challenge that came here was dirty utensils. How to transfer them from these various pockets of the plant to a centralized place for washing and then back to where it is required. This gave us an idea to use conveyor systems to transfer these dirty utensils from their current locations directly to a centralized washing station where they were cleaned, validated, and stored before being deployed for the next use. The other challenge here also was to handle tons of raw material per day. And we didn't want material moving throughout the plant. So we created a centralized weighing and dispensing solution with state-of-the-art online automated stations, LIMS, laboratory information recipe management systems, in order to enable the client to be faster in their processes. Of course, here too, we had linear flows of the product before the product entered the ASRS. The charm here was that we could start production only one module, or let's say one modular facility was ready. And we cordoned off the entire area before module 2, 3, and 4 were deployed. This enabled our client to be fast to market and start producing even when the facility is semi-finished. Just to give you an overview, how we moved within this facility train concept. We had a day store, then straight away to the granulation, blending, and other processes before to the packaging stations and then back to the ASRS. The other unique feature here was that we could cordon off the entire packaging area and the client could start the cleaning and other processes for the next batch, even when the packaging was happening for the previous batch. This again saved a lot of time for our client and enabled them to be fast during that day, during that shift, during that week. The major design features that we deployed at that both these case studies, or let's say mega facilities, were dedicated weighing and dispensing solutions, conveyor technology, automation to a level where it was easily manageable by the worker in terms of various software tools and other automated guided vehicle and logistics solutions. Of course, we had minimal or no open product handling at these sites, which was one of a clear mandate by both the owners. And technology helped us reach all of our goals quite easily. Just to give you an overview, both the sites had an ASRS, which we believe have already penetrated the pharma industry to quite some extent and are here to stay. So in both these projects, so let's say in most of our projects, whether it's oral solids, aseptics, liquids, vaccine production, or whatever, we do first look at the equipment technology, or we must look at the equipment technology as our first step, because that would tell us how the plant would be built and what should go around in terms of a clean room, in terms of utilities, in terms of the building, the facade, and the other logistic philosophy. I think without looking at the equipment, which is the key driver, we cannot design a facility. The other tools that we now see quite common in the pharma industry is the three-dimensional tools platform, whether it is a PDMS or an Autodesk-based Revit platform. I believe 3D technology is here to stay for long. It enables us to think about the project early on in terms of ease of access, in terms of maintenance, in terms of equipment movement, material movement, and gives us a bird's eye view before actually starting construction. We are able to reduce the error rates by nearly 20 to 30% in transferring everything from 2D to three-dimensional drawing. The next, let's say, key word or buzzword in the industry nowadays is continuous manufacturing. I believe, or let's say we believe, continuous manufacturing trickled to the oral solid dosage from the API market, which was continuous or semi-continuous already. Biotech was next, which was semi-continuous or in certain cases continuous now. And the last to catch up was the oral solid dosage forms. And we are doing that. We have seen quite a few facilities cropping up worldwide and even in India, where we have, let's say, modular continuous or full continuous oral solid dosage manufacturing sites. But the primary mandate is that the number of products should not be too large in order to not make it efficient to be continuous. Of course, in continuous, we generally start with a granulation section down, moving to the fluid bed drying, to tablet pressing, to coating, and then to packaging, all in a continuous way where the plant is running 24/7, 365 days in certain cases. All in all, through technology, we've been able to do that and monitor the product quality easily. Anytime I believe there is a crisis, we always go through a behavioral change. And this pandemic has made us think a little bit more or in deeper, or let's say in a very fast-tracked way about 4.0, or what we call a smart factory or a pharma 4.0. Of course, most of our friends in the pharma industry were deploying 4.0 solutions in islands in their plants, whether it's deploying a BMS system, an EMS system, a monitoring system, not only for the facility, but also for the product. We now see virtual reality and augmented reality also penetrating the facility, where the equipment manufacturer sitting either in Europe or in the United States is able to service the machine here in India or somewhere else without even leaving his home nowadays. We have smart equipment which is able to do a self-maintenance and give a trigger, or let's say give an alarm or give a note to the owner that I need or I might need a particular part in the next few days or few weeks. And all that through digital media, through interconnected factories. The manufacturer is today even able to know what spare part might be required just in time to the manufacturer. Long way we have come from Industry 1.0, where we were talking about steam engines, to today interconnected smart devices or factories, or in fact, in certain ways, I believe human beings as well. Of late, we have seen a lot of robotics. They have been present in the pharma industry since, I believe, 15 years or more, but primarily in the sterile industries. Glut already has a patent in the deployment of robots in an oral solid dosage plant, where we are trying to deploy it in a highly contained manufacturing environment where we need zero human intervention because it would not be safe for them. We have seen robots in oral solid dosage forms being deployed in radioactive product manufacturing for the obvious reason. And we do believe that robots are here to stay because they are fast. They can repeat the same task in a very efficient manner. And then data integrity also is quite important in today's world, which the robots or cobots fulfill quite easily. Of course, we have seen robots being used where we had to do heavy lifting. This came from the auto industry, and now in pharma industry, this is becoming a very common scene. 3D printing. 2015, the US FDA approved a 3D printed drug for seizures. And I believe fast forward now to 2020, we have many other manufacturers looking at this technology very keenly. I believe there is a place for this in the coming future, as this pandemic has, let's say, forced us to scale up. I don't know, or we don't know what the next one might warrant us to do. Might have to look at bespoke or tailor-made medicines, where 3D printing would definitely come in handy. 3D printing was not new to pharma. We had already prosthetics, tissues, and implants being printed, but now we have oral solid products. And what I heard recently, where HP had deployed a 3D bioprinter in US and Europe to print small batches of the COVID-19 vaccine, I think is something phenomenal which technology is allowing us to do. I believe in India also, the push for technology is there. Thanks to the Atmanirbhar and the digital push by our Honorable Prime Minister, we see a lot of our partners gearing up and fast forwarding their automation and digitization plans. Today, the end user, which is me, or let's say the patient, is very well connected. They are empowered because they want the knowledge. They are conscious about their health. They are conscious about knowing what is going inside them. They want to know the how, the why, the when. I'll give you an example. All these e-commerce platform people today send us a message that the rider is coming. His temperature at so-and-so time was X degrees, and his temperature at the end of the day is also messaged to us. So all this is possible because we are all now connected through either body sensors or some wearables directly to everybody. I believe the patient of tomorrow would force us to not only track and trace up to the manufacturing facility, but also go back to the API and also to the logistics chain. Because I would want to know at a particular day, what was the temperature of the recipe manager at that site in order to be fully confident that the product is safe. We believe augmented reality and virtual reality is also here to stay because it is giving the manufacturers the possibility to do maintenance on machines very fast. No longer than now they have to travel and spend hours on the road before they reach a site. They can almost at a click of a button have access to a machine and give the right solution. Robots and collaborative robots are here to stay as well. I believe they will work alongside humans in the near future, and the cage around those robots would slowly disappear as they morph into something completely different. Tailor-made medicines are also here to stay because what I eat might not be the same that somebody else should take. So I believe in the near future, certain pharmaceutical segments or products would move towards 3D printing or let's say tailor-made medication. I believe artificial intelligence has also enabled us to be fast in deploying products. For example, in this vaccine, we have been able to shorten, in this pandemic, we've been able to shorten the vaccine manufacturing timelines from 4 to 5 years down to 1 year or less. And all this has been possible because of supercomputers or deployment of artificial intelligence into the industry. I believe other than Pharma 4.4, Workforce 4.0 will also be important, where we would have to train our worker at that shop floor in order to be fully compliant, in order to use these tools given to them in the right manner and be future ready. So thank you everybody for listening, and I give the floor back to you, Kaushik Bhai. Thank you so much. Stay safe.
Thank you, Anuvrat. Mainly for taking all of us through the future of technology in projects, particularly in solid dosage form with the case studies. And also you gave an excellent oversight of other projects and other delivery systems, how it's going to be shaping the future of projects and the industry. Much appreciate your insights into the future of trends of technology. Thank you, Anuvrat. And I invite you to stay with us to take care of question and answer session at the end of the session of the speaker, our next speaker, Dr. Mahesh Balgat. Dear participants, I again suggest you may please start posing your questions for this first talk so that we can also go to next talk. You can always keep on posing your questions in between and we'll be taking up at the end of the session. Thank you, Anuvrat. And today, most debated hot topic is vaccines. We wanted to take about other subjects on the technology trends, but we thought vaccines will be the most appropriate considering this pandemic. And we have today none other than an expert on vaccines, Dr. Mahesh Balgat, to tell us about vaccines in much detail and technology involved in manufacturing and the issues, challenges, in vaccine manufacturing and availability. There are several misconceptions going around, and I think after listening to his talk, you all will be clear what vaccine it is and what it is, because we have heard about vaccines taking to our children, but not to the adult at most of the times. Now, I have pleasure introducing our guest speaker for the today's second talk, Dr. Mahesh Balgat. Mahesh is the Chief Operating Officer, Syngene International Limited. He holds a PhD from University of Utah, the USA, and a bachelor's degree in pharmacy from the University of Mumbai. He has over 25 years of experience in both pharma and biotechnology industry. Mahesh has worked in different factors of R&D, including analytical development, operations, technology transfer, regulatory science, quality, and projects. During his 20 years of US stint, he was associated with companies such as Celera, Genomics, and Molecular Probes, which is now Thermo Fisher, Monsanto, and Amgen. He is an excellent example of a diaspora is coming back to India and getting involved in the technology and the support of our mission of Make in India. After moving to India, Mahesh was associated with Biologics Manufacturing for short term, and just prior to joining Syngene, he was the Chief Operating Officer at Shanta Biotechnics, a Sanofi company, where his responsibilities included operations, quality, supply chain, long-term strategic planning, manufacturing technology, and human resources. At Syngene, Mahesh is the Chief Operating Officer and a member of the Executive Committee. On behalf of Indian Pharma Machine Manufacturers Association, I welcome Mahesh and request him to share his experience through presentation on vaccine technology, establishing India as an innovation hub in India. Over to Mahesh. Please, Mahesh, you can take up now.
Thank you, Mr. Desai. Thank you, Kaushik Bhai. Very, very much appreciative of giving me this opportunity to talk about a very hotly debated topic, a very interesting topic, especially in today's times, which is to do with vaccine manufacturing, vaccine supply, and the vaccine technologies that are currently in use. I just want to make sure you can all hear me.
Yes, you are very clear.
Okay, perfect. And I'm going to start sharing my screen while I also thank IP, MMA, and FICCI for giving me this platform to talk about vaccine technology. And I think this is going to be hopefully the next 30 minutes of a good level of understanding for all of you on what are we talking about when we talk about the fact that there is a vaccine that is really, really eagerly awaited by everyone. I want to make sure I can get rid of this particular screen so that I can see the whole screen. And I also now want to make sure that you are all able to see my screen.
Nice, perfect.
Yes.
You can go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Okay, all right. So, what am I going to cover today? It'll be a broad coverage of types of vaccines. First of all, why vaccines in India? What are some of the key considerations of what makes India a hotbed for vaccines? What are some of the types of vaccines that are there? What are we calling as the newer generation vaccines, if you will? And on some of those newer generation and some of the specific vaccines that are in the pipeline with regards to COVID-19, I'll put some highlights and some spotlight on which are the vaccines, how are they different, what technologies are they using. Then also talk a little bit about specifically what's India doing, right? There's a lot of efforts going on in India. What are those efforts? Those are focused on which type of vaccines. And then get into the nitty-gritty, following on the tracks of what we just heard previously, a little bit more details around what is involved in manufacturing. And one of the focus areas that I'll contribute to is the use of the application of single-use technology versus stainless steel technology in biologics manufacturing, the role of CMOs, because Syngene is a CRO, CDMO, and of course, plays both in the area of small molecules and large molecules such as vaccines, and therefore bring that component of it as to how can CMOs contribute in this race to protecting the planet today with regards to COVID-19. And then I'll talk about the even more recent topic, which is about how do we deliver the vaccines that are these advanced candidates. So we've seen some results coming out of Pfizer, we've seen some results coming out of Moderna, and more recently also the Serum Institute AstraZeneca vaccine. So what are some of the delivery challenges associated with some of those newer technology vaccines? What do they require? And then I'll also give you an overview of vaccine manufacturing in Syngene, which will take you again into a bit more of a detail around manufacturing requirements associated with vaccines and how does a CMO like Syngene offer its capabilities and flexibility. So let's start with why India. A bit of a background on vaccines. The word, of course, vaccine comes from the whole episode around protecting that was required for the cowpox disease by Edward Jenner. And this goes back to almost 200, 300 years, where smallpox or what was the variola vaccine, which was the disease that was required to be protected, killing a lot of people. And there, Edward Jenner introduced the concept of vaccines. Vaccines basically refers to something that's a preventative medicine or a preventative application, and is almost always made in biological preparations produced from living organisms, right? So one major difference between vaccines versus small molecules is that particular component of its origin. Now, what are some of the key drivers for India? India does offer a relatively low cost of manufacturing. Vaccines, as you can imagine, are to be provided all around the world, which means they go to developed countries as well as the developing nations, and therefore need to be low cost so that the developing countries can also afford them. We also have the base for doing research and development at a reasonable cost or a low cost. And this is something where it's actually an opportunity in India that needs to be picked up even more, because we are not doing sufficiently in terms of leveraging this particular landscape that India offers. India does also offer an environment for conducting clinical trials through the availability of both subjects as well as manpower and scientists to be able to conduct these studies during the entire development cycle of vaccines. Not only does India look at producing vaccines for the world, but also India has its own large local consumer base, which can consume the vaccines, and therefore makes sense for India to be a hotbed. Then to put all of this together, we need a good distribution system. We need the good regulatory bodies support in terms of policies, in terms of incentives, and in terms of facilities for administering these vaccines. And then, of course, creating the environment for export opportunities so that India can play the continued dominant role that it has been playing in vaccine supply. Today, India claims to be providing 50 to 60% of the dosage requirements worldwide or more through the manufacturing that India does for vaccines. Now let's start to look at a little bit about what is a conventional versus a newer vaccine, and for that I've called out at the very bottom of the slide. You see the key vaccine manufacturing steps. If we divide those into bulk antigen production, for those of you from the small molecule world will recognize this as API manufacturing. And then there's the formulation filling, there's the packaging, QC testing and product release, and then finally the distribution. One major difference to point out in the QC testing and product release is that all vaccines, every batch of a vaccine that is released to the market actually goes to a government body, a government lab for testing. Only then is it actually released onto the market. So some key differences that remain there. Now, in a conventional vaccine, what you see is that the complexity is much higher in terms of producing the bulk antigen or the API or the drug substance as it's called. And then because we have all gotten used to the 2 to 8 distribution, which is still challenging, the complexity goes down as you go towards the end of that value chain and the end of that supply chain. One of the newer types of vaccine that we'll talk more about is the mRNA vaccine. That has complexity on producing, but that also has a very high complexity with regards to distribution, because some of these mRNA vaccines are distributed and stored at -70, -80 degrees. And again, I'll come to that towards the second half of my talk. on what those challenges are and how we need to meet those. So what are some of the drivers and segments for this particular vaccine industry in India? You can look at them in slice them in many different ways. I won't go through each and every channel by which you can slice and dice them, because there is different vaccines that go by the age group that they are after, or the population that they are after, or the type of production that they are after, each having its own requirements, each having its own complexity. All said and done, the global vaccines market was almost $50 billion in 2019, and is likely to double in 2027. And of course, with the whole change in paradigm and the thought process around the value of vaccines, of course, these numbers will soon be outdated as we look at more and more diseases that need to be protected by vaccines. So let's talk. I started talking a little bit about mRNA vaccines and what's new. Let me go into this a little bit more. What you'll see on the right is more overall classification of vaccines, or in fact a sub-classification as well, because you'll see that there's many different types of vaccines that are called out. A smaller subset I've taken on the left, and with some examples of which of those currently licensed vaccines are using what type of technology. One common theme, just as a reminder, is that we are talking about vaccines that are produced in living organisms. So in some cases, they are live attenuated virus vaccines, such as the polio vaccine or the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, what we call commonly as the MMR vaccine. Then there's the inactivated viral vaccines. For example, the Japanese encephalitis vaccine falls into that category, or the hepatitis A vaccine falls into that category. Then there is bacteria-based vaccines such as pertussis, tetanus, tuberculosis, and so on and so forth. Then there are purified vaccines, and you'll see pertussis, for example, is made by different ways. You can make it as a whole organism-based vaccine, or just purified subunits, purified proteins coming from pertussis on organism, and turn that into a vaccine. Then you have the polysaccharide vaccines, which is all the pneumococcal vaccines. And then you have the oligo-based vaccines, which are the DNA or the RNA vaccines. All in all, many different ways by which you still use live production methodologies to generate vaccines. You adjuvant them in some cases, do not adjuvant them in other cases, and bring about the type of protection against viral diseases, bacterial diseases, and more. So let's talk about vaccines that are in development with regards to COVID-19. I know it's a busy slide. I'll take you section by section. Let's start here in the left. The live attenuated viral vaccines, which I talked about and introduced as a concept, which is where we look at the target viral pathogen, which is transformed to make it less virulent, is one of the type of vaccines that is being developed for COVID-19. An example of that is the work that Indian Immunologicals is doing with its partner, Griffith University in Australia. So that's a live attenuated vaccine. If we come down here to the bottom of the slide on the left, is the protein subunit vaccine. This is where we are looking at, and folks may have heard this terminology now quite well, the spike protein, which is forming the corona of the coronavirus. This protein subunit or some other proteins from the virus are what are produced as the proteins that are then adjuvanted and used as antigens for producing antibodies. A couple of examples of what is there in the pipeline is a vaccine from a company, Minvax, here in Bangalore, and Biological E based in Hyderabad. Both of these have protein subunit vaccines in the development. Then there's the inactivated virus vaccine. This is as opposed to reducing virulence, this is actually inactivating the virus with some sort of a treatment, with whether it's heat, irradiation, chemical treatment, and therefore actually killing the virus, having them still available in the injection, in the final formulation, And that's an example of the vaccine that is being developed by Bharat Biotech in collaboration with ICMR and NIV, which is the Covaxin the candidate that they have. And also the Chinese vaccine, the Sinovac Life Sciences Coronavac, is an example of an inactivated virus vaccine. One slide was not enough to cover all of those, so I have the same thing covered on this next slide, where we go into the viral vector vaccines. Now, the viral vector vaccines are where you use adenovirus to encode for the target viral protein of the virus of interest. And here the examples that are there is another vaccine candidate from China, which is the CanSino Biologics. And then we also have the AstraZeneca Oxford, which is the one that is being produced by Serum Institute as well. And then also the Gamaleya or the Sputnik V vaccine, who is working in collaboration in India with Dr. Reddy's laboratories. I'll move to the virus-like particle vaccines, which are here in the top right corner, and these are called Vlp vaccines, where you have the virus-like particles that are resembled or mimicked, almost making it feel like the real virus is there, but it is not infectious. And this recombinant protein nanoparticle technology virus is what is being developed by a company called Novavax. There are two other vaccine types here at the bottom of the screen on the left and the right, the DNA vaccine and the RNA vaccine. These are the vaccines that are being developed by Zydus Cadila, for example, in India, and then of course the Moderna and the Pfizer BioNTech vaccines are both of these categories. There's the DNA vaccine that's being developed by Zydus Cadila, and what is the candidate from both Moderna and Pfizer is the RNA. Now, these are absolutely brand new vaccines. There's never been an approved mRNA vaccine that's been on the market, and hence this is really exciting new technology where you take the RNA that is encoding for the target viral protein, you put it in a lipid nanoparticle delivery agent, and once in the body, it encodes for the protein, makes the protein, and then also starts to generate the immune response against that particular protein. So this is a broad landscape of the vaccine candidates that are in development. And now let's talk a little bit about India. Before I get to the specifics of the candidates being developed in India, just want to give you an overview of what is the regulatory steps that we go through, very similar to what you would do with any other candidate or any other drug approval. You start with the discovery and getting to know the target. But here's where technology comes in. One of the reasons for why we have been able to see a plethora of candidates coming through for COVID-19 is because of this phase of it being sped up by using technology interventions and arriving at candidates much earlier once the sequence of the virus was known. Then there is, of course, the preclinical stage, wherein you generate a lot of data in animal models and make sure that you have an understanding of the safety components of it, get into the clinical stages of development with the phase 1, phase 2, 3 approaches. And here I want to point out that what is being done for the COVID-19 vaccines are on the orders of tens of thousands of patients that are being subjected to the phase 3 trials for all of the vaccines that we are hearing about. But of course, on a much more accelerated time frame than what is the typical time frame which you see here at the bottom of the slide. And then subjecting it to regulatory review, where we expect to see the emergency use authorizations for some of these vaccines coming in the next few weeks, literally, if not next few months for sure. So India vaccine journey, I don't want to mention that there's more than, this number frankly has almost no meaning because it changes on a daily basis, but there is more than 150, 200 candidates that are constantly in the work in terms of new vaccine candidates being pursued. In India, there's more than 25 companies working on COVID-19 vaccines. The specific ones that I have called out here with no specific interest in leaving any major player out or including any major player in, but we have Serum Institute working with AstraZeneca and Oxford University vaccine. We also have Dr. Reddy's working on a viral vector vaccine. The Dr. Reddy's is of course not in as advanced stage as the Serum Institute AstraZeneca vaccine is, but they are also about to start their phase 3 trials very, very soon. Then there is the Bharat Biotech Vaccine, which is the inactivated virus that's in phase 3. Zydus cadila, as I mentioned earlier, is the DNA vaccine. That's not quite as advanced, but is getting there. And then there's Minvax, biological E, also just progressing into the clinical phase. And then Indian Immunologicals working with Griffith University, bringing some of these vaccines into the India development space. Now, one of the key things that I want to talk about, because a lot of my talk will be focused on manufacturing technologies related to vaccines, is that viral vector platform and inactivated vaccines require BSL-2, BSL-3 facilities. These have their own capacity constraints, and hence it's not so easy to get all of the capacity that you want installed and ready to run in a very short period of time. Despite all of that, I think there's a phenomenal effort that has happened in terms of progressing these candidates within the Indian landscape. So while this is one of the manufacturing challenges, the transport challenges that remains with mRNA vaccines is that they do need low temperature conditions at which they are stable, -20 or below. And again, I'll come to that in just a few minutes. So let me transition now into what is required for biologics manufacturing. And for that, I'll start with the comparison. And there are many comparisons on how you can look at a small molecule versus vaccine in terms of the size, in terms of how they are produced. I'll take more of a facility outlook to it, or more of a manufacturing outlook to it, and look at this from a CapEx and OpEx perspective. So the small molecule requirements from a CapEx and OpEx perspective are the ones that are listed here. It's fairly easy to build a small molecule facility when compared to a vaccine facility. One of the key differences that you will see is you need clean rooms for vaccine manufacturing. You need a high level of clean utilities, a lot of need for pure steam, a lot of need for WFI, so on and so forth. Also a very high level of monitoring of your bioreactors and all of the unit operations that are going on in a vaccine production area. All of that leading to high upfront investment from a high CapEx perspective. Turns out it's also not that simple from an OpEx perspective. Because of the need for higher level of AHUs, because of the need for higher level of integrities to be maintained, more cleaning that has to be done, more sampling that has to be done, there is also the higher operational cost that is there. Most importantly, a typical batch in a small molecule drug substance manufacturing may go for 2 to 5 days, maybe 10 days, depending upon the number of steps that you're talking about. On the other hand, a vaccine drug substance manufacturing batch might go for 2 to 3 months even, with inactivation steps in between, sampling steps in between, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, there's of course a huge difference in how you make a vaccine facility versus how you make a small molecule facility. I'll start to pick up the pace now with regards to some of these details, but once we say that vaccines are produced in living organisms, then you have different expression platforms, as they are called, in how they may be produced, whether it's mammalian, bacterial, insect cells. And so here, without going into every line, what you'll see is basically on different dimensions of speed, cost, yield, post-translational modification requirements, or regulatory approvals. Each of these has some advantages versus others. Some of them are less complicated, less involved versus others. And so there's no single best option on how you choose a manufacturing platform for your vaccine production. Now, very broadly speaking, if we start to talk about 100 million doses kind of a capacity that has to be produced, and we look at 2 or 3 different types of vaccines, the nucleic acid vaccines, the protein-based vaccines, and the viral vector vaccines, you start to see that there are high capacities that are required. Here you're talking about a technology where you introduce the nucleic acid into the human cells, and then the mRNA is the one that you get, which is in a lipid coat, and that's the nature of the technology of the vaccine. There you require about a 500-liter bioreactor capacity on a dedicated annual basis to produce about 100 million doses. Once you start to talk about protein-based vaccines, the size of the bioreactor goes up even more. And then you can also talk about the viral vector vaccines, where the size may be somewhere in between. But these are some of the considerations where when you start talking about the kind of equipment, the kind of manufacturing setup that you would need to produce about 100 million doses of any of these vaccines. I mentioned one of the trends that we are seeing in the industry, which has now been around for quite some time, is still the use of single-use versus conventional facilities. I also want to piggyback on what you heard earlier that about continuous processing. Continuous processing is also a trend in the biomanufacturing space or the vaccine manufacturing space. I won't cover it specifically today in the interest of time and just focus on the single-use versus conventional facility differences. Now, on an overall basis, when we start to look at this, the single-use versus conventional facility has many different, many components that are worth noting. Here you may be able to go up to 2 kL versus in a conventional SS or a stainless steel facility, you would go even higher, even up to 10,000 liters. There's a new concept in biomanufacturing called ballroom concept, and the flexible facilities are much more suited for that, giving you the opportunity to make it a lower COGS production and giving you the opportunity to make it a smaller footprint. Utility consumption is better because you don't do as much equipment cleaning. On the other hand, OPEX is higher because of the fact that you have consumables that you're consuming. The single-use facilities use plastic bags for as the bioreactors, and those bags and all of the supporting consumables can turn out to be very expensive. Of course, then also your energy costs are lower because you're not maintaining as high a classification of the area in where you're doing your flexible manufacturing or your single-use based manufacturing. Here, of course, as you can imagine, there's a lot of CIP, SIP involved, which not only involves utilities, but also slows down your time and increases your cycle time and decreases your availability of the unit for production, therefore having an impact on your capacity. Within biomanufacturing, the focus tends to be to look at both upstream and downstream. I won't go through each and every one of these and let you sort of get a feel for the fact that when you start to compare upstream and downstream single-use versus stainless steel facilities, you'll see that some of the things that we mentioned hold true and become even more important. Let me point out, for example, there's a lot more ease of connections that are possible when you're using a single-use facility because of the fact that these are reassembling bioreactors, if you will. On the other hand, there is a lot more consideration to be given to leachables and extractables of single-use bags and holders that we need to be aware of as well. And therefore also impacting the speed to market, because in general it's easier to put a facility of this together, but at the same time you also need to generate more data. Here you have a much bigger risk, that is that of cross-contamination between batches or just contamination in general when you are doing a biological manufacturing process. This is of course one of the risks that you want to avoid, and a good way to avoid that is by going to a single-use facility. Similar sort of components when we look at the downstream component of the process. In this case, I'll give one example. You can use pre-packed columns where you have a reduced risk of bioburden. On the other hand, you are typically using manual column packing, which increases your risk of bioburden. You also then have a reusable flow path, which again needs CIP, SIP. On the other hand, here you have a single-use flow path and gives you the opportunity to switch faster. So some of these components that have both an impact on cost and speed do come in as you take a decision between single-use versus stainless steel-based manufacturing. One more component of that plays into how we look at this particular component of designing a facility for biologics manufacturing or vaccine manufacturing is the kind of utility requirements. And I've shown some of those here on the slide to give you just some idea on the kind of facility scale that I've been talking about. Where do CMOs fit in? And I think this is a very important topic to understand, because today we are looking at vaccine manufacturing capacity that we believe is unprecedented in terms of its demand right now. Right? We've never ever, India has never ever done this kind of vaccine manufacturing for its own population of 1.3 billion. And frankly, no country has ever done that. So today we are looking at all kinds of barriers that we need to blow through and make sure that we have a safe, effective vaccine available as early as possible, which means everybody needs to pull together and look at what is possible to bring more and more vaccine manufacturing capacity with reliable supplies on the market. Now, typically, it takes a vaccine 10 to 12 years to reach the market. We know that. And of course, through a lot of technology interventions, through a lot of parallel processing, the speed at which COVID vaccine development has happened is again unprecedented, unheard of. Now, when we start to think about investing in a dedicated vaccine manufacturing facility, typically that's not an easy decision for a new vaccine manufacturer to make, because it really depends on the success in phase 3. If the candidate does not move forward after phase 3, you build capacity which you're not going to use. On the other hand, if you just launch out of a pilot facility, you're not going to be getting the entire market potential. And so it's a trade-off. And I think this is where in this trade-off is where the opportunity to partner with CMOs, CDMOs comes in. When an existing manufacturer uses existing facilities, they bring in limited capacity, whereas a CDMO will typically have built a lot more capacity, and then they have the ease of capacity management that they can bring in. These are typically dedicated to specific vaccines already, because they are already on the market. And if they were to choose to use a existing facility, then they're jeopardizing the supply of current vaccines. And of course, then also looking at the ability whether or not they can switch to this new vaccine in terms of a scale that would be required. On the other hand, the CDMOs can modulate their demand much more rapidly. They would have the flexibility of technology to support different type of vaccines, and then also may have expertise that they bring in from first generation or new generation vaccines. For example, in Syngene, we are already working on mRNA vaccine technology. I'll skip this slide in the interest of time, as I look at my 30 minutes is almost up, and so I'll move to some of the vaccine delivery challenges of advanced candidates. And this is with regards to the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, who announced their results a few days back. And some of this may again be outdated just based on the fact that this is an area that's moving rather rapidly. But what we do know is that they did announce very good efficacy results. This is something that was very, very important, given that this is a new technology vaccine, something that had never been seen and never been done at the scale in terms of testing that it has been done. Now, what's going to be important is we have seen what is recognized as a short-term immunity with the 90% efficacy results. And of course, that's based on, that needs to be sustained. It needs to be based on both antibody response as well as a T cell response. And for that, there needs to be repetitive monitoring of both a protective response and actual disease protection as well. And so I think one of the things that will play out as we move forward in the vaccine area is the fact that there is going to be a need to understand vaccines for COVID-19 supply chain, not just from delivering the vaccine to a immunization center where people can go in and get a dose for immunization, but it will have to go beyond. It will have to go beyond, because in some cases, these vaccines are 2-dose vaccines. So we need to make sure that people who have received the first dose also receive the second dose. And then it needs to go even further to make sure that there's actually a response that was generated, and that's a protective response and a long-lasting response, because some of that data is still in the works. And that brings up the components of the other challenges related to an mRNA vaccine, primarily to do with cost, the expense. We know Moderna has quoted some numbers that are roughly 30 plus or minus US dollars for the vaccine, and it also is something that requires very ultra low storage conditions, all of which poses challenges in terms of making the vaccine really work in terms of a day-to-day setting in a country like ours. So the good news is that we have proof of principle that these mRNA type vaccines are working and they will protect people against the disease. The bad news or the news that we still need to handle is that there are still barriers for us to tackle. And in that, I'll just portray the picture of why this is so much more challenging, even just on the supply chain side of it. is because we have different types of vaccines that we've typically been used to: heat sensitive vaccines, light sensitive vaccines, and then some that are not so sensitive because they can actually handle higher temperatures. And there are things that are called as last mile friendly vaccines. And there are a couple of those that are developed by India, one by Serum Institute, another by Sanofi Healthcare, but those are limited. And so the vaccine distribution challenges will remain, for which there are multiple solutions. I won't go through every single one of them, but there is the Envirotainer solution, which is the one that offers a operational temperature range that you see here. Then there is the reefers, as they are called, which have a higher capacity in a 40-foot reefer, but also a operating temperature that is a little and then we have the cold boxes, which right now there's a lot of work where local manufacturers are developing ultra low shipping options, and these cold boxes modifications is actually what Pfizer is also looking to do their shipping of their vaccine, which is the -80 vaccine. In. Let me let me just clarify one more component of the challenge that everybody needs to be aware of as we get into the reality of these vaccines, whether they are used in India or in different parts of the world. The Pfizer vaccine is stored at -80, which is a challenge. It's also 2 dose in 21 days. The Moderna vaccine is stored at -20. It's 2 dose and given apart at 28 days. The Sputnik, which is another vaccine that we talked about, is also stored at two different temperatures depending upon the liquid or the lyoform, and it's given 21 days, but it has two different viral vectors, each on two different doses. Just putting all of this together can tell you how complicated supply chain and logistics has to be to manage who got which vaccine and what is the follow-up vaccine that they're getting, and therefore the immunity that they get. This is where I believe that testing comes in to continuously test for the protective immune response, both for T cell as well as antibody responses. And that is why I think vaccine supply chain with COVID-19 doesn't end with simply delivering the vaccine to the site of where immunizations will happen, but needs to go much more beyond that. Finally, I'll give you a very quick overview of vaccine manufacturing in Syngene so that you start to get a feel for what a real vaccine manufacturing facility looks like. And frankly, we have worked in a way where our mammalian facility can double up for both monoclonal antibody manufacturing as well as for vaccine manufacturing. And we have our equipment train is what you see here. We have multiple scale single-use bioreactors because this is a disposable based facility, to give you the highest level of protection and highest level of flexibility, but also allowing for parallel processing by having two upstream suites that allow for parallel operations, and then harvest by either centrifuge or depth filtration, and then a downstream train with the post-viral segregation. This is the specifics of the cell culture facility that we have in Syngene, and as you see, the SUB refers to the single-use bioreactor based ways of working that we have established, both in upstream and both in mammalian and bacterial manufacturing areas. Some more specifics about the kind of setup that we have from a capacity and capabilities for upstream as well as downstream, and you can see the pre-viral and the post-viral and the chromatography steps details. In conclusion, I would say that India is definitely poised for further growth in vaccine supply, but also vaccine value chains, so that India does not remain only a manufacturing base, but can also become a base for where new vaccines are developed and new vaccines are introduced through India. And I think in that, I would say that the capabilities, the scale, and the major equipment that India can bring is what really makes India where it is at the forefront today, but also in the forefront and the future. With that, I will stop, and again back to you, Kaushik, to take it forward. Happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. And again, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mahesh. I'll request all the participants to continue to posing questions. We'll be taking up. We have a few minutes left for taking question answer session and satisfy your queries. I'll request Anuvrat also to come on the video chat. Yeah, fine. You are there. So there is a one question which has come up. I'll just read out on the chat box. To everyone, Mahesh, actually, how the companies are going to deal with counterfeiting, likely counterfeiting. Your views on that?
So I think it's actually a very important question, and this is something that we, of course, as a pharmaceutical and a biotechnology industry, have been battling for many years to come. The reason this becomes even more important is this vaccine is going to be a very important and a very selective commodity, at least for the first few months, if not for the first few years. And we saw this already with even remdesivir, for example. Remdesivir was getting some coverage, both in terms of its effectiveness, but also its aftermarket sales, if you will. I think this is something that is, of course, an important topic. Now, the way the way this is going to be have to dealt with is essentially the same way as what we've been doing in terms of track and trace systems. And though these systems for track and trace have become better and better with time, now the component that we need to recognize is whether you bring holographic images or whether you bring a track and trace that goes up to the primary container, secondary container, tertiary container. All of those are going to add to the cost of the vaccine. And this is one thing that is going to be a balance between how much monitoring systems we put in for avoiding counterfeiting measures without actually increasing the cost of the vaccine dramatically.
Oh, thank you, Mahesh. Anuvrat, there's a question for you. You spoke about the smart factory projects. Can you please?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Anuvrat. Yeah, you spoke about smart factory projects ongoing at across the globe, but would like to know whether such facility or such projects are active in India, and I'm aware that that doing in pieces, but the integration is a very big challenge. Can you just give your opinion on that?
Sure, sir. Thank you for that question. I believe in India, we are already having smart factories in terms of when we are talking about car manufacturing or let's say the auto industry. But I believe in pharma, this is a fully connected or smart factory is yet to be, let's say, put in India. But I believe we are going very fast on this track. We already have connected buildings being deployed already at the pharma segment also. And we have now other technologies which will enable us to be future ready already in place in India. So in a nutshell, right now, no factory in India, but yes, they are coming up and they are being built as we speak. And in the near future, this will be a very common process.
Okay, thank you, Anuvrat. And then a question to Mahesh now. You explained the very highly complex process of vaccines, but it appears that it requires a very high skilled educated workforce. So can you throw your light on this, how you take care of such a situation? Because vaccine is never taught in any of the curriculum to that much detail the way it has been explained.
Yeah, and I think it's again a valid question given that vaccine manufacturing is important. But I think one of the good news that is there is vaccine manufacturing is also now becoming mainstream because of what I explained, that there are facilities that you can repurpose or facilities that you can share between monoclonal antibody manufacturing and vaccine manufacturing, as an example. And because India has already started its journey in biologics, this kind of a talent base is, of course, developing, but it's something that we need to continue to pay attention to, and we need to introduce more and more courses on vaccine manufacturing, on biologics manufacturing overall in the country, because this is a skill set that will continue to be important. I will say one more thing though, is we also need to look at more and more processes that can be automated so that our staff is doing the more value addition components of it and not just the routine manufacturing components of it. It builds in one, a resilience in our supply chain, and second, a much more important workforce over time.
Yeah, thank you, Mahesh. Question to Anuvrat. In your opinion, what type of infrastructure support is needed to use this newer technology, the smart factory? Because I think there are more questions on the smart factory and the Pharma 4.0, which is the most talked about subject as on date. So would like to know your views on this.
I think just to add to what Dr. Mahesh said, we need to train the operator. We need to have a workforce 4.0 also. Having technology or the hardware is one aspect of the entire game, but we also need to train the people and the manufacturers and not only the suppliers or the workers, but also the management level people in order to give them an overview what this technology can do and what are the benefits. Because most of the times you only look at the cost aspect, we forget that we are able to shorten time, do repetitive tasks again and again with data integrity also in place through the deployment of these technologies. So I think
Yeah,
for me, important would be to have the workforce 4.0 and not only look at it as hardware.
okay. So I may just add to what you have said. Indian Pharma Machine Manufacturer Associations are working with the Indian Pharma Alliance to work out the best document on the good engineering practices. And that will really help the industry at large. At the same time, IPM is simultaneously working on developing some kind of a certificate course on the good engineering practices, where we can take up, like Mahesh said, biologics, you said the projects, and so all those topics will be taken up, and we are working on that. And hopefully, we'll get your insights too when we develop the curriculum for that. Thank you. Another question for Mahesh. Is there any side effects to these vaccines which have been likely to get in market? But nobody wants to be the first, so there is always a worry.
Absolutely, but we have to look at the data that has been published, right? And so these vaccines have gone through phase 1 trials, which are specifically to look at safety. These vaccines have now gone through tens of thousands of patients worth of data in their phase 3 trials, during which you look for both the safety and the efficacy components of it. And so, this is something that is going to be based on the approval of the regulatory agencies based on all of this data. So I don't think we need to look at this any differently than any other approval. Yes, the times have been shortened, but the data is being generated and the approvals are based on the regulatory assessment of all of that data. So, I can't say specifically which vaccine has what side effect, but at the same time, I would say that the number of side effects that have been reported for all of these vaccines is relatively very, very low. We've seen 1 or 2 side effects which have been also mild or reversed within a matter of days, which is when the vaccines have continued with their trials as well.
Thank you, Mahesh. There's one more last question now. In one of your press slides, you mentioned about the importance of a CMO and how it helps in vaccine supplies. Can you elaborate a little more on that? Because so far we have heard about the players, those who are already in vaccine field, but the CMO, how important it is and how it can expedite the supply as well as the availability of vaccines at large to the people.
Yeah, I think CMOs, have one major benefit, which is that they have capacity that they have built and are able to bring into utilization much faster than a typical manufacturer would. See, as a manufacturer, you may not be willing to put in a whole lot of capacity for a vaccine that you don't know whether it's going to sell at 20 million doses a year or at 100 million doses a year. So what kind of a facility do you build? Now, if you build 20 million doses and if you need 100 million doses, then you've under managed your capacity or evaluated your capacity. On the other hand, if you build at 100 million and you only need 20 million, then you're going to have realized that you spent in a whole lot more capex and actually created something that is now going to increase the cost of the vaccine. This kind of a trade-off is what you need to look at a CMO for. And for the first few initial years of the vaccine on the market is when it's perfect time to go to a CMO, understand what the market needs, and let the CMO produce it. The other bit component that CMOs will play, especially CMOs who are using the newer technology such as the single-use technology, is the speed at which they can deliver a single batch is going to be better than the normal traditional facilities. So your vaccine supply chain is going to move much faster when you work with a seasoned CMO, and therefore you're going to have higher capacity on the market even with the same amount of capex that you're working with, or the same amount of investment that you're doing with the CMO. So both from limiting your capex investment as well as providing reliable supplies to the market, the first few initial years of launch and your clinical supplies is where is the most opportune time to work with CMOs and get on the market rather soon.
Okay, thank you. I have very interesting questions. I was about to stop, but I said, let me take up this question. See, everybody has anxiety on vaccines. You know that now. Do we have any mild vaccine options for the newborn babies, or it will be same for all? Because vaccines, people say everybody has to take it, including newborn babies. So, yeah. What's your take on that?
So let me explain a little bit about how the trials are done, right? So the trials are done, especially the phase 1, which are the safety trials, are done in healthy human volunteers, typically in the age of 18 to 45, right? Which is the least vulnerable population, if you will. Once you have actually conducted your trial at that age group, if that was your target age group, then you start to think of the either ends of the spectrum and try to see if the vaccine is safe for both of them. What do you mean by either ends of the spectrum? You look at the senior citizens, 65 plus and above. And then you also look at the infants, let's say below 18 or below even 6 years or below even 2 years of age. Once you have evaluated that the vaccine is safe in both of these extreme populations, if you will, is only when then the vaccine gets introduced for that population. So you will see that vaccines don't always have the same age group for all of the vaccines that they're approved for, because it depends on where they are in their approval cycle. And so you don't necessarily need a mild vaccine. What you need is a vaccine that has been proven to be effective and safe in that quote unquote infant population or younger population. And that's exactly what you will see with these vaccines as well. The data has to be generated and needs to be demonstrated in that target population, rather than looking for a mild vaccine option.
Okay, thank you. There is a question on which is the best vaccine brand available in India and what is the cost of it? But I think everyone knows that there is no brand available as on date, and cost is still to be worked out. So
I think that when you get into that one, there's way too many questions of which vaccine will the mRNA vaccines even be available in India because of the logistics challenges that I mentioned, and then who's going to fund it? What costs are they going to be at? Is the government going to pay for it? Are the individuals going to pay for it? And these are questions that are still being worked out.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mahesh and Anuvrat, for being with us today.
Thank you.
I have a pleasure of giving vote of thanks to Oswin D'Souza, who is one of the most active team member and who is the chair of IPMMA for MSME and member of the Maharashtra State Council MSME division at FICCI, apart from executive committee member for IPMMA. Mr. Oswin, are you there?
Yes.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Kaushik, sir, for the wonderful words. You were really brilliant as a moderator. You really did a great job, I would say. Kept us busy, kept the panelists also asking a lot of questions, very specific questions. We all know the sector which stood out as a savior for mankind in 2020 has been health and pharma. We have today come to realize the benefits of science and the importance of research and development. We have also seen how much technology, automation, digitization has helped in saving lives. The entire world today is eagerly waiting a vaccine for COVID cure. But what goes behind the making of these vaccines? The pharmaceutical technology, the development and research has been given perspective. and deep insight by our eminent speakers, Mr. Anuvrat Singhal and Dr. Mahesh Balgat. It was truly wonderful. Believe me, I really enjoyed this webinar for the last 1 hour plus. It has been really very, very insightful, especially the hardware part of it, which Mr. Anuvrat covered up, the hardware and the pharmaceutical equipments, the automation, the technology part of it, and the combination with Dr. Mahesh on the science behind the vaccines and the difficulty and the complexities of, including the logistics, was wonderfully explained. The storage also is another concern. I thank the IPMA team for bringing this webinar together, Mr. Kaushik Desai for moderating today's event, and Mr. Harshit Shah for the lovely opening remarks. I also thank FICCI for the platform of this global virtual healthcare in sharing information and knowledge across the globe. We are also on YouTube on this webinar, so I think the world is watching this. On behalf of IPMA and FICCI, being also part of a member of FICCI, I would say thank you to the eminent speakers, Mr. Singhal and Dr. Mahesh, and all exhibitors, attendees, and visitors for their valuable time and success of this webinar and the exhibition. Please note, we have something equally special tomorrow, a similar webinar with a colloquium of CEOs addressing tomorrow's webinar on packaging, engineering, processing, and drug delivery. This fantastic panel for tomorrow is a must-attend event. So do make the best of it and hope to see you all tomorrow too. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Kaushik.
Oh, thank you, Ashwin. As always, you have been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwin. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
IP, MMA, and FICCI. Thank you very much.
Hope you have some more like this. Thank you. Thank you, Anurad.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Anurad. Bye.